The man at the center of the hit podcast Serial was back in court today, once again fighting for his freedom. The Maryland Supreme Court heard oral arguments from attorneys representing Adnan Syed and an attorney representing the victim in the case, Hae-Min Lee, and her family. Now, you may recall, Syed was a teenager when he was convicted in 1999 of murdering his high school girlfriend, Hae-Min Lee. She had been strangled and found in an unmarked grave in a park. And the podcast Serial, chronicling the story, is widely considered one of the most popular podcasts in history. Now, in September of last year, after 2 decades in prison, Baltimore City State Attorney Marilyn Mosby held a hearing asking the court to throw out Syed's conviction. Now, after DNA testing excluded him as a suspect, and she also argued prosecutors withheld information about 2 other suspects from the defense.
Not yet declaring Adnan Syed is innocent, but we are declaring that in the interest of fairness and justice, he is entitled to a new trial.
6 months later, in March of this year, an appeals court reinstated Syed's conviction and ordered a redo, citing the victim's family wasn't given adequate time to personally attend the hearing. Well, Syed's attorneys argued since prosecutors decided not to retry him, the family's lack of in-person participation should not be enough to reinstate the unjust conviction. Well, the court did not issue a ruling, and depending on what it decides, Syed could find himself back in prison. All right, still with me here is Deputy Chief Investigator for Gwinnett County, Georgia DA's office, Curtis Clemens. And Curtis, this one, you know, there's been so many twists and turns in this case, and this is yet just another one. And you know what? This is one where I feel for both sides, because the victim's family thought for years that this case was settled. They had gotten justice for their family, for their daughter, or for Hae-Min Lee. And this guy, if we found out that there were some issues with the case, and they've been arguing this for almost 20 years, they finally came to the conclusion that he is not a suspect, his DNA didn't match, and this conviction should be thrown out. So he had certain expectations. Now, they all got to come back again and get a redo because they didn't give enough time for the victim's family to come in and be a part of the proceedings. Love to get your thoughts.
Well, you know, this is a sad story.
Yes, it is.
But at the same time, I do see the family side, but I also see Syed's side. You have had your conviction overturned. Mm-hmm. You are released. And due to an error by the courts, they now want to bring you back in. When you look at all the factors that are included in here, things that he has been saying since the beginning, it wasn't me. Mm-hmm. His DNA did not come back. Law enforcement, unfortunately, withheld information. That's critical.
That is critical.
You know, and then you have 2 other potential suspects that they didn't even really investigate. You have to give this person a chance to move on with his life. Mm-hmm. If what he said matches up with the evidence they have thus far, you have to give him a second chance.
Yeah, no doubt. Marilyn Mosby there, you saw the Baltimore State Attorney, she basically said that the ruling severely limits the prosecutor's ability to reverse an injustice. Yes. And that's interesting. I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Well, you know, the damage has been done.
Yeah.
You know, and it's a sad story for 2 families that have been affected. And can the courts really go back and give justice? You know, you may reopen the case, allow law enforcement to legitimately investigate the new information that they now have. And hopefully, maybe they can find closure, you know, for the victim's family. But if not, can the courts really give them justice?
Yeah, and you know what's interesting is victims' rights are a big thing.
Yes.
And there are many laws. I think just about every state has laws protecting victims' rights. So the question becomes here, how do we protect victims' rights? They were told on a Friday by the DA's office that on Monday this hearing was going to happen. The family member who could make it in and wanted to be a part of this was in California. Not enough time for them to get in. They asked the court to postpone it for a week so they could get in. Court said no. But at the end of the day, the appeals court thought that his showing up on Zoom wasn't enough. Everybody else was there in person. They should have been there in person. They will be represented by an attorney, make some arguments on their part. But again, do you think that protecting victims' rights means that they had to have been there in person and Zoom wasn't enough?
Well, I think, here's my opinion on that. I think here in Georgia we have what's called Marcy's Law. Similar situation, you have to notify the victim or the family or the surviving family, of any changes in the defendant's status. If they're going to be released, whatever the case may be. 24-hour notice is generally considered enough time. Is it really the responsibility of the court to make sure that you can get in from out of the country, from another state, and be back in court? Not necessarily. All they have to do is notify you. And you have to take what you can get at that time.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that's exactly what Marilyn Mosby said. She said, we did everything according to the letter of the law. Right. This is protocol. This is how we do things. And the fact that this was a difficult situation for the family should not control. And you don't put Syed through this again for that again. But that's what's going to happen here. So we'll have to see how this Supreme Court rules on this issue. We'll be watching closely because, again, this is one, you just never know.
Sad case.
It is, and you never know.